What? Am I gonna be a billionaire? Or CEO of a big corporation? Really? I don't need to worry about anything anymore? Can you feel happy if you live the decided future? Macbeth was tossed about the prediction and had a tragic ending. That's all about Macbeth. This movie will last for about 15 minutes. Someday become the King of Scotland?
You must murder the king.
You must kill the king.
Macbeth thought. The forest was moving. Macbeth was shocked and fearful.
Hearing this news, Macbeth began to tremble. Do you know the stories called Four Great Tragedies? Hamlet, Othello, King Lear, and Macbeth. Those are very famous stories in the world.
But I don't think many people can explain the details very well. Then, this time I'll talk about one of those tragedies, Macbeth. Now, let's get started. When Duncan the Meek was the King of Scotland, there lived a great thane, or lord, called Macbeth. Macbeth was the thane of Glamis and was related to the king's family. He was admired for his great bravery in war.
In fact, he had just helped win an important battle for the king. Banquo was another Scottish general. He and Macbeth were traveling together, going home from the battle. Late one night, Banquo and Macbeth came to a lonely field. There they saw three people.
These people looked like women, but they had beards and wore strange, wild, weird clothing.
Macbeth and Banquo approached them slowly. Then the first strange woman greeted Macbeth by name. She called him the Thane of Glamis. Macbeth was very surprised that she knew his name and title.
Then the second woman spoke. She called Macbeth the Thane of Cawdor. This confused Macbeth because he was not the Thane of Cawdor. That title did not belong to him. Finally, the third woman spoke to him. All hail, Macbeth, you shall be king hereafter.
Macbeth was now extremely shocked and confused. There was no reason that he would ever become king. In fact, King Duncan had two sons who would inherit his throne someday. Next, the three strange women turned to Banquo and spoke to him. They called to him, lesser than Macbeth, and greater. Not so happy, but much happier. Then they said to Banquo, you shall never be king. But your children, the children of Banquo, shall be kings of Scotland. Then the three mysterious women disappeared into the air. Banquo and Macbeth quickly realized that these women must have been witches.
Suddenly a messenger from the king arrived. He had a message for Macbeth. He told him that Macbeth had just been named the Thane of Cawdor. Macbeth was amazed. The witch's prediction had come true. He began to wonder if the witch's other prediction would come true too.
Would he, Macbeth, someday become the King of Scotland?
Turning to Banquo, Macbeth asked, do you hope that your children will become kings of Scotland someday, as the witches predicted?
The witches are creatures of darkness, Banquo answered. Often they tell us small truths in order to trick us into doing large and terrible things.
But the wicked predictions of the witches were very powerful, and Macbeth did not listen to Banquo's warning.
From then on, Macbeth only thought about becoming King of Scotland. He dreamed of having power and glory. Macbeth told his wife about the witch's predictions. His wife was a bad woman. She always wanted more power for herself and Macbeth.
She did not care how they got more power. Lady Macbeth encouraged Macbeth to try to become king. You must murder the king, she told him.
There is no other way. Then you will become the king. But Macbeth was not as eager as his wife. He was afraid of doing such a terrible murder. Not long after, King Duncan visited Macbeth's castle. King Duncan's two sons, his older son Malcolm and his younger son Donalbain, came with him. The visit was to honor Macbeth for his victory in battle. Macbeth's castle was large and elegant.
The king liked it very much and was enjoying his visit there.
King Duncan was very pleased by the beauty and politeness of Lady Macbeth, too.
She smiled sweetly at the king and treated him with great respect. But underneath her smiles, Lady Macbeth's heart was black and evil. She was planning to murder the king. Although she looked like an innocent flower, she was in fact like a dangerous snake.
That night, King Duncan was tired after his long journey, and so he went to bed early. 2 servants guarded him in his bedroom as he slept. Lady Macbeth went to talk to Macbeth and convince him to murder the king. However, Macbeth was becoming reluctant.
"There are good reasons not to kill the king," he said to his wife. "First, Duncan is my king, and he is also related to me. Second, I am the king's host. He is staying in my house. It is very wrong for a host to harm his guest. Third, King Duncan is a good and fair king. He loves his people and treats them well.
And if King Duncan is murdered, his people will have to revenge his death.
Finally, the murder of a king is a terrible deed. My honor and reputation would forever be destroyed by killing King Duncan."
But Lady Macbeth was determined. "You must kill the king," she told Macbeth. "You promised that you would do this.
"You must be brave and keep your promise. Once you promise something, you must do it. If I had made a promise, I would keep it even if it meant killing the smallest and most innocent child. You must kill the king, and it will be easy to do. Duncan is sleeping and helpless. Also, the murder will be over quickly, in just one night.
Then you will be the king for all of our days and nights. Finally, no one will suspect us. We can blame the king's servants." Lady Macbeth's evil words convinced her husband. So Macbeth got a knife and went quietly into King Duncan's bedroom. Suddenly he saw something strange and frightening in the air. A ghostly knife with blood on it. The handle of the knife was pointing toward him. "Is this a knife I see before me?" Macbeth cried. But when Macbeth tried to grab the knife, the strange vision disappeared. "I must have imagined the knife," Macbeth told himself.
He tried not to be afraid. He approached the king's bed and quickly killed him with his knife.
The king's servants stirred but did not wake up. Then suddenly Macbeth thought he heard a ghostly voice. The voice seemed to say, "Sleep no more. Macbeth has murdered sleep, the innocent sleep, that feeds life."
Then the voice seemed to cry louder. It said, "Sleep no more. Glamis has murdered sleep. Therefore Cawdor shall sleep no more. Macbeth shall sleep no more." Macbeth hurried back to his wife. His mind was full of terrible thoughts. "I've killed the king," he told her.
Lady Macbeth had him wash his hands because they were covered with blood.
Meanwhile, she took his knife and put it with the king's servants so it would look like they had killed the king.
In the morning, the murder of King Duncan was discovered. Macbeth and Lady Macbeth pretended to be shocked and sad. At first, people thought that the king's servants had killed him. But then, people began to suspect Macbeth. Macbeth had more to gain from the king's death than the 2 servants did.
Fearing Macbeth, King Duncan's 2 sons fled. Malcolm, the eldest, went to England. The younger, Donalbain, went to Ireland. With Malcolm and Donalbain gone, Macbeth was crowned King of Scotland. Thus another prediction of the 3 witches came true. But
Macbeth and his new queen could not forget the other prediction of the witches.
That although Macbeth should be king, not his children, but the children of Banquo, should be kings after him. This prediction upset them very much.
Therefore Macbeth decided to kill both Banquo and his son Fleance.
Then the witch's prediction about Banquo's children will not come true, Macbeth thought.
So Macbeth and his queen held a special dinner for all the thanes of Scotland, including Banquo and Fleance. As Banquo and Fleance travelled to the dinner, they were attacked by murderers who had been hired by Macbeth.
Banquo was killed in the attack, but Fleance escaped. Meanwhile, at the dinner, Macbeth and his queen acted like gracious royal hosts. Macbeth pretended to wonder where Banquo was. "Where is my good friend Banquo?" Macbeth asked the other lords. "I wonder why he is late." Just then, the ghost of Banquo entered the room. The ghost sat on the chair that belonged to Macbeth.
Macbeth's face was white with fear, and he trembled. However, the queen and the other lords could not see the ghost. They thought that Macbeth was staring at an empty chair. Macbeth began to speak to the ghost. The queen realized that Macbeth was speaking to the murdered Banquo, and she did not want the other lords to hear Macbeth's words. She quickly ended the dinner and sent the other lords away. She told them that Macbeth was feeling ill.
But Macbeth and his queen continued to have terrible dreams. Their minds were filled with awful visions and thoughts. The escape of Fleance also upset them, because they knew that Fleance's children would become kings of Scotland someday. With these miserable thoughts, Macbeth and his queen were never at peace. Their days and night were filled with great worry. And so one night, Macbeth decided to go and see the three strange witches again. He wanted to find out what other predictions they had.
Macbeth found the witches in a dark cave in the woods. The witches had known that Macbeth was coming, and so they were ready for him. They did terrible magic to call up spirits to help them predict the future. In a giant cauldron, the witches mixed together many things.
They added toads, bats, snakes, the eye of a newt, the tongue of a dog, the leg of a lizard, the wing of an owl, the scale of a dragon,
the tooth of a wolf, and the mouth of a shark.
The witches stirred the cauldron. Then suddenly, three evil spirits appeared. The first spirit told Macbeth, "Beware of Macduff, the Thane of Fife."
Macbeth had often been jealous of Macduff, and so he thanked the spirit for the advice. Then the second spirit spoke to Macbeth. It said, "Do not be afraid, Macbeth. Be bloody and bold, because no one born of a woman will be able to hurt you." Macbeth was very pleased with this.
"Then I have nothing to fear," he said. "But I will still kill Macduff, just to be careful." Finally, the third spirit spoke to Macbeth.
"You shall never be beaten until the forest of Burnham comes to Dunsinane Hill." These words made Macbeth even happier.
"How can a forest move?" he cried. "That is impossible. I am completely safe. I need not worry." Before he turned to leave, Macbeth cried, "Please, spirits, I must ask you this. Will Banquo's children ever be kings of Scotland?" Suddenly a ghostly vision appeared to answer his question. Macbeth saw a line of kings, followed by Banquo.
In Banquo's hands there was a mirror. The ghostly Banquo smiled and pointed at the mirror, which showed even more kings. Then Macbeth knew that Banquo's children would be kings. The three witches disappeared, leaving Macbeth angry and filled with bloody thoughts.
Despite everything the spirits had said, Banquo's children would still be kings and Macbeth's children would not.
Then Macbeth got terrible news. Macduff, the Thane of Fife, had gone to England. He had joined Malcolm, son of King Duncan.
Together Malcolm and Macduff were forming an army to fight Macbeth.
To punish Macduff, Macbeth killed his wife and children and the rest of his family. This terrible deed made the other Scottish lords angry.
Many of them fled to England to join Malcolm and Macduff's army. Everyone hated the evil King Macbeth and began to plot against him. Soon afterwards, Macbeth's wife and queen died. Filled with guilt for her crimes, tortured by terrible dreams, Lady Macbeth killed herself.
Then Macbeth was all alone, without even one friend. Soon he began to wish for death for himself. But the army of Malcolm, King Duncan's son, was already marching toward Scotland. They were coming to fight Macbeth.
The approaching battle forced Macbeth to summon his courage to fight. He decided that if he had to die, he would die in battle and wearing his armor. Macbeth's courage was also strengthened by the spirits' predictions. He remembered their words to him. No one born of a woman would be able to hurt him, and he could not be defeated until the forest of Burnham came to Dunsinane. Both of those predictions made Macbeth feel confident that he would win the battle. For who had ever heard of a man who was not born of a woman? How could a forest ever move from one place to another? Both things seemed impossible, and so Macbeth shut himself up in his strongest, safest castle. There he waited for Malcolm's army to arrive.
Then one day, a messenger arrived for Macbeth. He was pale and shaking with fear.
The messenger said, "I was looking toward Burnham, and suddenly it seemed as if the forest was moving." Macbeth was shocked and fearful. How can this be possible? Is the spirit's prediction coming true? He wondered. But then he grew determined. But if I must fight Malcolm, then I will. In truth, I am tired and almost wish that my life were done. So Macbeth called his soldiers and went out to meet Malcolm's army. The strange sight of a forest moving was soon explained. As Malcolm's army marched through the forest of Burnham, Malcolm ordered his soldiers to cut tree branches and hold them up in front of them. This was a way of hiding the army's size.
From a distance, however, the marching soldiers looked like a forest moving.
Thus one of the prediction of the spirits came true, and Macbeth began to feel less confident. Then a great battle began between Macbeth's army and Malcolm's army.
Malcolm and his army fought well, but the desperate Macbeth fought fiercely, too. He killed many of his enemies. But then Macbeth saw Macduff. Remembering that the spirits had told him to beware Macduff, Macbeth tried to run away. He wanted to avoid fighting Macduff. But Macduff had been looking for Macbeth throughout the battle. He would not let him run away. "Tyrant! Murderer! You killed my wife and children!" Macduff cried. Then Macbeth remembered the words of the spirit. How no one born of a woman could hurt him. Smiling confidently,
Macbeth answered, "You cannot hurt me, Macduff. I have a charmed life. I cannot be harmed except by the man who is not born of woman."
"Then you should be afraid, for your charmed life is over," Macduff replied. "I was never born of a woman in the ordinary way that men are born. Instead, I was taken from my mother's womb." Hearing this news, Macbeth began to tremble. He cursed Macduff and cried, "In the future, no man should ever believe the lying words of spirits and witches.
They fool us with words that have double meanings. I will not fight you, Macduff." "Then live," said the scornful Macduff. "We will make you into a show, just as men show monsters.
We will show you to the people with a sign that says, 'Here men may see the tyrant.'"
"Never," said Macbeth. His courage returned with his despair. He decided to fight to the death. "I will not live to kiss the ground at young Malcolm's feet." Macbeth said to Macduff, "Although the forest of Burnham has come to Dunsinane, and even though you are not born of woman, I will still fight you to the death."
With these last words, Macbeth began to attack Macduff. After a terrible fight, Macduff killed Macbeth and cut off his head. The battle was over. Malcolm's army had won. Macduff gave Macbeth's head as a present to the young king, Malcolm.
King Malcolm then took his rightful throne. He ruled over Scotland as his father Duncan had done before him. And thus ended the story of the murderer and tyrant Macbeth.
Later, as the witches had predicted, Fleance's descendants became kings of Scotland, ending with James VI of Scotland and the First of England. Please subscribe to my channel. We're gonna show you world masterpieces in about 15 minutes with manga. Manga is Japanese-style comics that is easy for everyone to understand. We're sure that you can grasp the context shortly.
See you next time.